Number 1. Patagotitan mayorum. Imagine standing in a dry stretch of Patagonian scrubland in southern Argentina where wind cuts across the steppe and bones lie just beneath the soil. In 2012, a ranch worker on La Flecha Ranch in Chubut province noticed something massive eroding out of the ground. What looked like a single curiosity turned into one of the most important sauropod discoveries of the 21st century. Paleontologists from the Museo Paleontologico Egidio Ferruglio, led by José Luis Carbalido and Diego Pol, began excavating and quickly realized this was not a single mystery bone. It was a bone bed containing at least 6 young adult individuals stacked across the same fossil horizon. That detail matters more than the size headlines suggest. Most claims about gigantic sauropods rest on one partial femur or a handful of vertebrae. Patagotitan offered something rare: multiple skeletons of the same species at comparable life stages, allowing scientists to cross-check measurements rather than guess from a single bone. The headline figure that emerged was a length of about 37 meters from nose to tail. Stretched out in a parking lot, that body would span roughly 3 city buses parked end to end. The mass estimate proved harder to pin down. The original high estimate published in 2017 pushed close to 69 tons. Later studies using different limb scaling equations narrowed the plausible range to between 42.5 and 71.4 tons, depending on the method. The femur alone measured 2.38 meters, taller than nearly any human you will ever stand beside. Sauropod gigantism was not magic. It was engineering. Patagotitan combined 4 design features that, together, allowed terrestrial mass to push past anything alive today. The neck extended feeding reach without forcing the body to walk. The torso housed an enormous gut for fermenting plant material. The tail balanced the neck. The limbs functioned as graviportal columns, built for weight-bearing rather than running speed. Add to this an avian-style air sac system extending into hollow vertebrae, lightening the skeleton without sacrificing strength. The work of researchers like Carbalido, Pol, and collaborators at institutions across Argentina and the United States combined volumetric reconstruction with limb circumference equations. That 2-part approach is why Patagotitan stands on firmer ground than older claims for Argentinosaurus or Portosaurus, which remain known only from fragments. Yet even the richest fossil beds lose almost everything. Skin texture, organ arrangement, exact posture, mating behavior, vocalizations, herd dynamics, all gone. Modern relevance comes through the question of biomechanical limits: heat dissipation, blood pressure to a raised head, bone stress under loading, and pressure on the foot pads. All set ceilings on land animal mass. Patagotitan tells us where that ceiling sat. Where do those same constraints take us next when we shift from land to ocean? Picture, before you move on, a person standing beside its femur like a child beside a flagpole. Number 2. Ichthyotitan severnensis. The story shifts to the Somerset coast of southwest England, where beach fossils still rewrite marine reptile history every few years. In 2020, an 11-year-old named Ruby Reynolds was walking along the foreshore with her father, Justin Reynolds, when she spotted fragments of fossil bone embedded in the mud. Those fragments would later be identified as part of a giant lower jaw. Paleontologist Dean Lomax of the University of Manchester worked with the Reynolds family and ichthyosaur specialist Paul de la Salle to formally describe the animal in 2024. The fossil came from the Westbury Mudstone Formation. Geological dating placed it at roughly 202 million years ago, near the boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic periods. Marine reptile evolution had already pushed through several earlier experiments by that point, with smaller ichthyosaurs giving rise to progressively larger forms over tens of millions of years. Ichthyotitan represents one of the final, most extreme expressions of that lineage before the end Triassic extinction reset marine ecosystems. The fossil itself is a giant syringular, part of the lower jaw. The more complete specimen preserved about 145 centimeters of bone. Comparative scaling against related ichthyosaurs suggests the full syringular may have exceeded 2 meters in life. From there, researchers extrapolated a total body length of roughly 20 to 25 meters. The upper end of that range pushes Ichthyotitan into modern whale-length territory. A clarification matters here. Ichthyotitan was not a dinosaur. It was a marine reptile belonging to a separate lineage, the ichthyosaurs, which evolved fish-like body shapes through convergent evolution. streamlined torso, powerful tail fluke, large skull, and paddle limbs. Comparison with giant shastasaurid ichthyosaurs such as Shawnosaurus places Ichthyotitan as a likely close relative or descendant of that group, representing what some researchers describe as a last burst of ichthyosaur gigantism before extinction closed the chapter. Estimating body length from a jaw alone carries obvious risk. Skeletal proportions vary across related species, and a long jaw does not always scale neatly to a long body. The team led by Lomax used proportional ratios from better preserved relatives and stressed the cautious nature of the estimate. Most of the skeleton remains absent: limbs, ribs, vertebrae, full skull architecture. The missing pieces are larger than the found pieces. Why does this matter for the broader question of size? It demonstrates that reptiles reached whale scale tens of millions of years before whales themselves evolved. Likely prey included fish, cephalopods, and possibly smaller marine reptiles. Marine buoyancy did the work that land could never offer, supporting bulk that no terrestrial animal could carry. Picture a jawbone over 2 meters long, implying a skull larger than a small car. What happens when an animal turns dense bone itself into a tool for staying submerged? That question leads directly to the next entry. Number 3. Perucetus colossus. In 2023, a team of paleontologists led by Giovanni Bianucci of the University of Pisa, alongside Mario Urbina of the Natural History Museum of Lima, published one of the most disputed mass estimates in vertebrate paleontology. The animal in question came from the Eocene rocks of the Ica Desert in southern Peru, dating to about 39 million years ago. The environment had once been a productive coastal marine setting, rich in food and sediment. Perucetus belonged to the basilosaurids, an extinct family of early whales known for elongated bodies and a mix of ancestral and modern features. The genus name means colossal whale of Peru, and the species name doubles down on that idea. What set Perucetus apart from its relatives and from nearly every other animal in the fossil record was a condition called pachyosteosclerosis. The term describes bone that is both thickened, meaning extra layers of bone material, and densified, meaning the internal spaces fill with compact tissue. The result is a skeleton that weighs far more than the same bones in a typical whale. The fossil material recovered included 13 vertebrae, 4 ribs, and part of the hip. Working from this partial skeleton, the team estimated the skeleton alone weighed between 5.3 and 7.6 tons. Total body mass, based on assumed proportions of skeleton to soft tissue, was originally placed at a sweeping range of 85 to 340 tons. The upper figure would make Perucetus the heaviest animal ever to exist, surpassing the modern blue whale. That upper estimate did not survive long. Subsequent reassessments by other research teams, including work by Ryosuke Moteri at the University of California, Davis, argued that the original calculations overweighted the soft tissue contribution. Revised figures place Perucetus closer to 60 to 70 tons at a length of about 17 meters, with some models suggesting 98 to 114 tons if the animal reached 20 meters. The debate is ongoing, and that is exactly the point. Why does dense bone break simple whale scaling? Modern blue whales achieve enormous mass through soft tissue volume with relatively light bones. Perucetus reversed that strategy. Its bones functioned as ballast, much like the dense skeletons of modern manatees and dugongs, which use weight to stay submerged in shallow water without constant effort. That makes Perucetus structurally closer to a sirenian than to a fast-moving rorqual whale. It likely cruised slowly through coastal shallows, feeding on the seafloor or in the water column with minimal energy spent fighting buoyancy. What this taxon teaches is how paleontology handles uncertainty. Mass modeling depends on assumed body shape, assumed tissue density, and assumed proportions of skeleton to total volume. Change any input and the output shifts dramatically. Soft tissue, blubber thickness, exact body outline, and tail morphology remain missing. The phrase heaviest animal ever depends entirely on which model you trust. A single vertebra of Perucetus looks less like bone and more like carved stone furniture. But how do you turn loose vertebrae of a much longer body into a size estimate at all? That question becomes central in the next case. Number 4. Vasuki indicus. The lignite mines of Gujarat in western India have produced fossil discoveries for decades, but few have captured imagination like the find described in 2024 by paleontologists Debajit Datta and Sunil Bajpai at the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. Working in the Panandro lignite mine region, the team recovered 27 vertebrae from a single individual of an extinct snake. The specimen dated to the early Middle Eocene, around 47 million years ago, a period when India was a moving continent drifting toward its eventual collision with Asia. The genus name, Vasuki, refers to a serpent king, from Hindu mythology coiled around the neck of the god Shiva. The species name indicus marks its Indian origin. Snake length is estimated by comparing vertebrae size and shape against living species with known body lengths. Datta and Bajpai used regression equations derived from modern snakes to scale up from the fossil vertebrae. Their estimate placed Vasuki at roughly 11 to 15 meters long. That range puts Vasuki in direct conversation with Titanoboa severnensis, the famous South American giant snake from the Paleocene of Colombia, described in 2009. Titanoboa, estimated at about 12 to 14 meters, had long been considered the largest snake ever documented. Vasuki sits in overlapping territory, and depending on which end of its size range proves correct, it may rival or exceed Titanoboa. Vasuki belonged to Madtsoiidae, an extinct snake family that persisted in parts of the southern continents long after vanishing elsewhere. The body form was heavy and cable-like, suggesting slow movement and an ambush predation strategy rather than active pursuit. Habitat reconstruction from the surrounding sediments indicates swampy and riverine environments with mean annual temperatures estimated at around 28 degrees Celsius in the broader study context. That warmth matters. Large-bodied snakes depend on environmental heat for metabolic function, and the early Eocene was one of the warmest intervals in the past 65 million years. The technical work focused on vertebral scaling and phylogenetic placement. Comparing Vasuki vertebrae to a database of living and extinct snakes allowed the researchers to estimate not only length but also general body proportions. Yet the skull is missing. Full body thickness is unknown. The prey record is absent. And any color pattern on the skin is lost. The lower estimate of 11 meters is already enormous. The upper estimate of 15 meters is spectacular and slightly more uncertain. Modern comparison helps anchor these numbers. Living green anacondas reach about 5 to 6 meters reliably, with rare individuals approaching 7. Reticulated pythons can stretch a bit longer in extreme cases. Vasuki would have at least doubled those lengths. Likely behavior involved constriction rather than venom, since maetzoids show no skull evidence of venom delivery systems. Tropical warmth and abundant prey allowed reptile bodies to stretch to scales modern ecosystems no longer support. A snake of that length lying across the front of a typical suburban house would extend from one corner of the lot to the other. What happens when an apex predator instead takes to the sky and grows to the height of a giraffe? That introduces our next entry. Number 5. Hatzegopteryx thambema, late Cretaceous. Hatzeg Island, located in what is now Romania, sat in the middle of an ancient European archipelago about 66 to 72 million years ago. The island ecosystem produced a strange roster of animals. Dwarf sauropods like Megarosaurus, small ornithopods, and a notable absence of large theropod dinosaurs. That predator vacancy created opportunity, and one group filled it in a form that initially struck researchers as physically improbable. Hatzegopteryx belonged to the Ajdarchids, a family of pterosaurs known for long necks, long limbs, and reduced flight surfaces relative to body size. It was first described in 2002 by paleontologists Eric Buffetout, Dan Grigorescu, and Zoltan Chiki. Initial comparisons placed it alongside Quetzalcoatlus northerpi from late Cretaceous Texas, the previous benchmark for giant pterosaurs. Hatzegopteryx differed in one critical respect: its build was substantially more robust. Wingspan estimates commonly fall in the range of 10 to 12 meters, with the original description suggesting at least 12 meters. The skull may have approached 3 meters in length, longer than most adult humans are tall. That head sat at the end of a short, thick neck, in stark contrast to the elongated necks of related Ajdarchids. Subsequent biomechanical work, particularly by Mark Whitten of the University of Portsmouth and Darren Naish, examined the neck vertebrae and found evidence of strong resistance to compression and torsion, the kinds of forces generated by struggling prey. How does a flying animal get this large without collapsing under its own weight? The answer lies in internal bone structure. Pterosaur bones contain trabecular networks, a lattice of thin struts inside a hollow shell. The architecture has been compared to expanded polystyrene foam reinforced with internal beams, strong against bending and compression, very light per unit volume. Hatzegopteryx applied that same engineering at giant scale, producing a skull that could deliver bite force without weighing the animal down. The behavioral interpretation has shifted over the past decade. Older reconstructions imagine giant asdarchids as skim feeders or stork-like fish catchers. Whitten, Naish, and others have argued that Hatzegopteryx more likely operated as a terrestrial stalker, walking through the island landscape and grabbing prey from the ground. Likely targets included hatchling dinosaurs, small adult dinosaurs, mammals, lizards, and carrion. With no large theropods present on Hatzeg Island, Hatzegopteryx may have functioned as the apex predator. What remains uncertain includes the precise shape of the wing membrane, exact launch behavior, and detailed hunting strategy. Pterosaur launch in giant forms is itself a contested topic, with most researchers favoring a four-limbed vaulting launch using the powerful forelimbs as catapults. Modern relevance comes through the lesson that flight does not require fragility. Robust predation and aerial capability coexisted in this animal through lightweight engineering rather than reduction of structural strength. Picture a giraffe-tall pterosaur walking across an island full of smaller dinosaurs. If a flying animal could reach that scale, what does mammalian gigantism look like by comparison? Number 6. Paraceratherium. The Oligocene epoch, running roughly from 34 to 23 million years ago, saw mammal lineages diversify across a cooling world. Across the steppe and woodland mosaics of Central Asia in regions now spanning Pakistan, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan, a hornless rhinoceratoid mammal grew to a scale that mammalian land animals have never matched since. Paraceratherium was first identified in the early 20th century from material collected in Baluchistan by paleontologist Clive Forster Cooper of the University of Cambridge. Later expeditions, including those led by Henry Fairfield Osborn and the American Museum of Natural History in Mongolia, added more material under additional genus names such as Indricotherium and Baluchtherium. Most researchers now consolidate these under Paraceratherium, though taxonomic debates continue. Shoulder height reached about 4.8 meters. For comparison, that is taller than a single-story house from floor to ceiling. Mass estimates for the largest individuals fall in the range of 15 to 17 tons, comparable to a large African bush elephant, though configured very differently. Height and mass are separate records, and Paraceratherium dominated the height category among land mammals. The long neck gave it a giraffe-like browsing reach into tree canopies. The skull could exceed 1 meter in length, equipped with forward-projecting incisors used to grip and strip branches. Some reconstructions suggest a short, mobile proboscis or flexible upper lip used to pull leaves and twigs toward the mouth. The limbs were columnar, but not identical to elephant limbs. Rhino lineages evolved their own solutions to weight-bearing, with subtly different joint geometry and foot structure. Putting together a full skeleton has required combining bones from multiple individuals across multiple sites. No complete articulated Paraceratherium has been recovered. Reconstructions therefore involve composite work, scaling matched elements from different specimens to produce a coherent body. Researchers like Donald Prehistory of Occidental College and Spencer Lucas of the New Mexico Museum of Natural History have published extensively on the genus, including its complicated taxonomic history. Knowledge gaps remain. Full body proportions, soft tissue facial anatomy, social behavior, and exact gestation length all remain uncertain. What is well established is the daily food demand. A 15-ton browser would have required hundreds of kilograms of vegetation per day, implying broad foraging ranges and low population densities. Competition with giant proboscideans, the elephant relatives, has come up in discussions of which group held the largest land mammal title, but height places Paraceratherium ahead in that specific dimension. Modern relevance includes the clarification that Paraceratherium was not an elephant ancestor. It belonged to the rhinoceros lineage, with no proboscidean affinity. The same body size can be reached through different anatomical routes. Mammalian gigantism emerged through a combination of browsing height, limb support, and digestive capacity for processing low-quality plant material. A human standing next to one would barely reach the lower chest of the animal. But what happens when a reptile, rather than a mammal, becomes the largest terrestrial predator of an entire continent? Number 7. Megalania prisca, now formally known as Varanus priscus. Pleistocene Australia during the past 500,000 to 40,000 years hosted a remarkable assemblage of megafauna. Giant marsupials like Diprotodon, the Thylacoleo marsupial lion, large flightless birds, and a roster of reptiles unmatched on other continents. Among them was the largest known terrestrial lizard, a monitor whose popular name Megalania persists alongside the current scientific designation Varanus priscus. The animal was originally described in the 1859 by British anatomist Richard Owen, who coined Megalania prisca from fragmentary remains sent from Australia. Later, taxonomic work moved the species into the genus Varanus, the same group that includes living monitor lizards such as the Komodo dragon and the Nile monitor. The renaming reflects evidence that Megalania was a true monitor, not a separate lineage. Length estimates have varied across decades of research, older figures pushed as high as 7 meters. More recent analyses, including work by Stephen Rowe of the University of New England in Australia, have favored a more cautious range of about 5 to 6 meters. Some estimates extend down toward 4.5 meters. The variation comes from the fragmentary nature of the fossils. No complete skeleton exists. Most material consists of isolated vertebrae, jaw fragments, limb bones, and teeth. Dental and jaw evidence is more complete than postcranial material. The teeth were blade-like and recurved, designed for gripping and slicing flesh rather than crushing bone. The skull shows adaptations for ripping meat from prey, similar to but scaled larger than those of the modern Komodo dragon. Likely, prey included large marsupials, reptiles, birds, eggs, and carcasses encountered through scavenging. The ecological role probably blended active predation with opportunistic feeding on dead animals. The comparison with Komodo dragons goes further than overall body plan. Recent research on Komodo dragons has identified venom glands that contribute to prey incapacitation. Whether Megalania shared this trait remains inferential. Venom glands consist of soft tissue and rarely fossilize. Researchers like Brian Fry at the University of Queensland have argued, based on phylogenetic position within the broader monitor lizard family tree, that venom-assisted predation was plausible. Direct fossil evidence, however, is not available. Knowledge loss extends to full skeletons, exact weight, hunting behavior, social structure, and reproductive ecology. Modern relevance ties Megalania into broader debates about late Pleistocene extinction across Australia. Aboriginal Australians arrived on the continent at least 65,000 years ago, and overlap with Megalania populations is possible, though direct evidence of interaction remains contested. The extinction of Megalania coincided roughly with broader megafaunal losses across Australia, attributed variously to climate change, human hunting, fire regime changes, or some combination of these factors. Australia's isolation allowed reptile predation to persist at scales matching mammalian carnivores on other continents. A 6-meter monitor lizard would dwarf any living Komodo dragon. What happens when an animal takes a different route to size using wings stretched across more than 6 meters of open ocean wind? Number 8. Pelagornis sandersi. In 1983, construction work at the Charleston International Airport in South Carolina exposed fossil bones in marine sediments dating to about 25 million years ago, during the Oligocene epoch. The material sat in storage at the Charleston Museum for decades before being formally described in 2014 by paleontologist Daniel Ksepka, then at the Bruce Museum in Greenwich, Connecticut. Ksepka named the bird Pelagornis sandersi, honoring Albert Sanders, the curator who had originally recognized the fossil's significance. Pelagornis belonged to the Pelagornithids, a family of seabirds commonly called bony-toothed birds or pseudo-toothed birds. The lineage persisted from the late Paleocene through the Pliocene, then vanished entirely. Wingspan estimates for Pelagornis sandersi fall in the range of 6.1 to 7.4 meters, with a conservative central estimate of about 6.4 meters. By comparison, the largest living flying birds, the wandering albatross and royal albatross, reach wingspans of around 3 to 3.5 meters. Pelagornis effectively doubled that. The pseudo-teeth were not true teeth in the mammalian or reptilian sense. They were bony projections lining the upper and lower beak, formed from the same bone as the jaw itself. Function appears tied to gripping slippery prey, particularly soft-bodied marine animals like fish and cephalopods. The bird could not chew. The pseudo-teeth held prey long enough to swallow it whole. Body mass estimates fall in the range of 22 to 40 kilograms. That figure produces the central paradox of the genus. Enormous wingspan paired with relatively light body weight, achieved through extraordinarily thin and hollow wing bones. The walls of the wing bone shafts were so thin that handling fossil material requires extreme care to avoid crushing. Aerodynamic modeling conducted by Xepka and collaborators suggested that Pelagornis was specialized for dynamic soaring over open ocean. The technique uses wind gradients near the water surface, harvesting energy from the difference in wind speed at different heights. Modern albatrosses use the same approach to cross thousands of kilometers with minimal flapping. Powered takeoff was almost certainly difficult for an animal this size. Pelagornis likely relied on wind, slope, or wave action to get airborne, similar to how albatrosses launch from cliff edges or run downwind across water to gain lift. Once airborne, the bird could probably remain aloft for extended periods without active flapping. What remains uncertain includes exact feather length, takeoff behavior in different wind conditions, and the precise three-dimensional posture of the wings in flight. Knowledge loss applies even to relatively well-known fossil birds. Pelagornis was the largest by wingspan among flying birds documented in the fossil record, but not the heaviest. That distinction belongs to other extinct birds with different body proportions. Wingspan and mass are separate measurements, and the largest flying bird in one metric is not necessarily the largest in another. The lesson here links wing loading to energy-efficient flight. Pelagornis turned ocean wind into its primary engine. Wings stretched across a small room like a light aircraft parked on a runway. What happens when ocean conditions instead support a turtle expanded to vehicle scale? Number 9. Archelon ischyros. The late Cretaceous western interior seaway divided North America into two landmasses for tens of millions of years, running from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. The seaway's waters preserved exceptional marine fossils, particularly in the Pierre Shale Formation, across the Dakotas, Nebraska, and surrounding states. Archelon ischyros, the largest documented turtle in the fossil record, came from these sediments. George Reber Wieland of Yale University first described the genus in 1896 based on a remarkable specimen collected in South Dakota. The largest known individual, mounted at the Vienna Natural History Museum, reaches a length of about 4.6 meters from beak to tail. Flipper span extends to more than 5 meters across, comparable to the width of a car lane or a small vehicle parked across a driveway. Archelon was a protostegid, a member of an extinct family of marine turtles. It was not a direct ancestor of any living turtle species. Modern leatherback sea turtles, the closest living analogs in terms of body plan and lifestyle, evolved from a separate lineage. The shell of Archelon was not a heavy, plated structure like the carapace of a modern tortoise. Bone reduction made the shell lighter and more leathery, covered by tough skin rather than thick keratin scutes. The arrangement suited open water travel where weight would have been a hindrance and where buoyancy and streamlining mattered more than armor. The forelimbs were enormous propulsion surfaces functioning like underwater wings. Powerful muscle attachments suggest sustained swimming over long distances, though exact migration routes are unknown. The beak was hooked and powerful, suited to crushing or tearing soft-bodied prey. Diet likely included mollusks, crustaceans, jellyfish, squid, and other soft-tissue marine animals that lived in the seaway. Hard-shelled prey may have been broken open with the beak rather than ground with teeth, which Archelon did not possess. The ocean it inhabited was crowded with potential threats. Mosasaurs, large marine lizards reaching 10 meters or more, patrolled the seaway as apex predators. Plesiosaurs, sharks, ammonites, and large bony fish filled the same waters. Bite marks on some Archelon fossils suggest that even animals of this size were not immune from mosasaur attacks. Large size functioned as deterrence rather than absolute protection. Mounted skeletons in museum collections have shaped public perception of Archelon more than most extinct animals. The Vienna specimen, displayed since 1902, set the visual standard. Subsequent finds have added detail about variation in body size, growth rates, and skeletal development. Researchers, including James Hutchison at the University of California, Berkeley, have worked on Archelon's relationships to other protostegids and to the broader turtle family tree. Knowledge loss includes exact shell texture, migration routes, nesting behavior, and population structure. Modern relevance involves comparison with the leatherback sea turtle, the largest living turtle. Leatherbacks reach about 2 meters in length and use a similarly reduced shell. Despite the convergence in body plan, the lineages are separate. Archelon shows that streamlining can replace armor when water itself becomes the main support medium. A human lying inside its body outline would fit easily. But what happens when an animal that is neither a dinosaur nor a mammal grows to elephant scale before dinosaurs even reach their peak? Number 10. Lisowicia bojani. Late Triassic Poland, roughly 210 million years ago, sat in a world before classic Jurassic dinosaur dominance. Early dinosaurs existed, but they had not yet reached the giant scales that would define the later Mesozoic. The dominant large herbivores of the time included groups that no longer exist in any form. Among them, in a clay pit near the village of Lisowice in southern Poland, paleontologists led by Grzegorz Niedźwiecki, Tomasz Sulej, and Jerzy Dzik recovered fossils of an animal that would force a rewrite of late Triassic ecological assumptions. Lisowicia bojani, formally described in 2018, was a dicynodont. The group consisted of tusked, beaked herbivorous synapsids. The term synapsid covers the broader evolutionary line that eventually produced mammals, distinct from the line that produced reptiles, dinosaurs, and birds. Dicynodonts had thrived earlier in the Permian and Triassic, but most were modest in size, ranging from pig-sized to cow-sized animals. Lisowicia broke that pattern entirely. Length exceeded 4.5 meters, height at the shoulder reached about 2.6 meters. Mass is estimated at around 9 tons, comparable to a modern African bush elephant. The discovery upended a long-standing assumption that dicynodonts had peaked at moderate sizes and declined toward the end of the Triassic. Lisowicia demonstrated that large-bodied dicynodonts coexisted with early dinosaurs in some ecosystems. The skeletal anatomy showed upright, weight-bearing forelimbs configured in a columnar posture. Earlier dicynodonts had typically been reconstructed with more sprawling or semi-sprawling limb postures. The shift to vertical limb columns in Lisowicia paralleled, but evolved separately from similar postures in dinosaurs and later mammals. Limb histology, the microscopic structure of bone, suggested rapid and sustained growth, similar to growth patterns seen in some dinosaurs. Feeding likely involved a tough beak rather than substantial dentition, since dicynodonts had reduced their teeth over evolutionary time, retaining mainly the prominent tusks. Strong jaw mechanics allowed processing of fibrous plant material. The exact diet, social behavior, skin texture, and reproductive ecology remain unknown. The phylogenetic importance is significant. Lisowicia placed a non-dinosaurian terrestrial tetrapod at giant scale during a time when the dinosaur lineage was still expanding into the larger size classes. It demonstrated that the path to elephant-scale herbivory was traveled by multiple branches of the synapsid and archosaur evolutionary tree, not just by dinosaurs and later mammals. Researchers including Niedźwiecki and Sulej of the Polish Academy of Sciences continue to work on the broader Polish Triassic fauna, which has yielded additional evidence about ecological interactions of this period. Modern relevance involves correcting the dinosaur-centered narrative of Triassic and Jurassic gigantism. Size experiments happened across the evolutionary tree. An early dinosaur of the same period would have stood dwarfed beside a herbivorous mammal cousin like Lisowicia. With 10 distinct giants now laid out, how do scientists actually arrive at these size numbers from such incomplete fossil evidence? Measuring giants from broken evidence requires a set of techniques that have developed over more than a century of paleontology. The phrase largest animal changes, meaning depending on which metric you choose. Length, mass, height, wingspan, and completeness of fossil material all produce different rankings. Patagotitan ranks well by length and gains credibility from the presence of multiple individuals at one site, allowing direct cross-checks of measurements. Ichthyotitan demonstrates the opposite situation. A jaw alone, scaled against relatives, produces an impressive but uncertain estimate. Perucetus illustrates how dense bone disrupts normal mass calculations. The same techniques that work for typical whales fail when the skeleton itself functions as ballast. Vasuki shows vertebrae-based body length scaling, where regression equations from living snakes translate fossil vertebrae into estimated total length. Pelagornis demonstrates that feather reconstruction influences wingspan estimates because the actual feather length must be inferred from bone landmarks rather than direct preservation. The underlying technical concept is allometry, the study of how proportions change with body size. Allometric equations link preserved bone dimensions to whole body dimensions. Limb circumference equations, particularly those developed by researchers including Per Christensen and Nikos Solonius, estimate mass for land animals based on the cross-sectional area of the femur and humerus. Volumetric models take a different approach. The reconstruction starts with a body outline, assigns density values to different tissue types, and calculates mass from the resulting volume. Each approach has strengths and limitations. Missing soft tissue can shift mass estimates dramatically in either direction. Competing models are not a sign of failure. Conservative and maximum estimates should both be reported because both reflect genuine uncertainty in the underlying data. Fossils rarely preserve full bodies. Organs, muscle volume, fat distribution, and exact body outline must be inferred. Composite reconstructions from multiple individuals are common, particularly for animals like Paraceratherium, where no complete skeleton exists. This teaches viewers to read paleontology headlines with appropriate skepticism. Formally described in peer-reviewed taxa differ from rumored or fragmentary giants. A single giant bone can be real, can be diagnostic, but can still be hard to scale to a complete animal. Prehistoric size is measured through probability, comparison, and mechanics. Imagine calipers beside a fossil bone, then a ghosted outline of the missing animal sketched in around it. What forces actually limit how large any body can become? The physics of oversized bodies operates through a small set of principles that constrain every animal, living or extinct. The square-cube law states that as an animal scales up in linear dimensions, its volume and therefore mass increase faster than its surface area. Double the length, and mass increases roughly eightfold, while the cross-sectional area of bones supporting that mass only increases fourfold. The result is that support stress rises with size. Patagotitan addressed this through column-like limbs and air, sac-lightened vertebrae. Foot pressure and ground reaction forces become limiting factors at extreme mass. A multi-ton foot requires substantial pad area to avoid sinking into soft ground or fracturing under load. Water changes the equation entirely. Buoyancy reduces effective weight, allowing aquatic animals to reach sizes impossible on land. Ichthyotitan, Perucetus, and Archelon all benefited from this support. But water introduces its own costs. Drag rises sharply with speed and size, and feeding strategies must match the available propulsion power. Perucetus used ballast instead of speed, cruising slowly through productive shallows. Modern blue whales achieve far greater bulk through soft tissue volume, but they evolved from lineages that had already optimized for streamlined movement. Wing loading defines the constraint for flying animals. The metric measures body weight divided by wing area. Lower wing loading allows easier flight at lower speeds. Pelagornis kept its wing loading manageable through extreme wing length and low body mass. Hatzegopteryx solved the same problem differently, combining substantial body mass with internal skeletal lightening through trabecular bone architecture. Larger flyers need low mass relative to wing area, efficient launch mechanisms, or access to strong winds for soaring. Heat balance constrains terrestrial giants. Surface area to volume ratio drops as animals grow larger, making heat dissipation harder. Large bodies retain heat efficiently in cool environments, but risk overheating in warm ones. Paraceratherium faced this constraint in the Oligocene climate of Central Asia. Circulation demands rise sharply in tall animals. Pumping blood up a long neck against gravity requires substantial cardiac output and elevated blood pressure. Snake gigantism depends on thermal biology and prey ecology. Large ectotherms need stable warm climates and abundant prey to support sustained growth. Vasuki lived in exactly such conditions during the warm early Eocene. Turtle gigantism worked through flipper propulsion and reduced shell weight, allowing Archelon to maintain mobility despite its size. Muscle power and exact posture remain reconstructed indirectly from bone landmarks. Extinct giants reveal the same physical rules that still shape living animals. Every size gain creates a cost in heat, in food demand, in joint loading, in launch energy. Evolution grows giants only when physics leaves a narrow path open. A single diagram could show pillars, wings, fins, and ballast all solving different versions of the same fundamental problem. But physics alone does not produce a giant. Ecosystems do. Ecosystems that built monsters share a particular set of features. Each of the giants in this list lived in a specific world, not a generic prehistoric backdrop. Patagotitan reflects Cretaceous southern hemisphere ecosystems where titanosaur sauropods dominated the large herbivore role for tens of millions of years. South American floras of the time included conifers, ferns, and emerging flowering plants, providing vast biomass for sauropod feeding. Ichthyotitan reflects late Triassic marine ecosystems, productive but soon to be disrupted by the end Triassic extinction event. Perucetus reflects the productive Eocene coastal waters of what is now Peru, where upwelling currents supported abundant marine life. Vasuki reflects warm, humid Eocene environments in what is now Western India, with mean annual temperatures supporting large reptile metabolisms. Hatzegopteryx reflects island ecology and missing giant theropods, creating a predator vacancy that Ajdarchids filled. Paraceratherium reflects Oligocene browsing landscapes across Central Asia, with open woodlands offering accessible tree canopy vegetation. Megalania reflects Pleistocene Australia's megafaunal food web, with abundant marsupial prey supporting reptilian apex predators. Pelagornis reflects open ocean wind systems and rich marine prey availability. Archelon reflects the western interior seaways complex marine ecosystem with diverse soft-bodied prey. Lisowicia reflects late Triassic herbivore experimentation outside the dinosaur lineage, where multiple groups competed for large herbivore roles. Gigantism often follows energy availability and ecological opportunity. Prey abundance, vegetation productivity, and predator vacancies all play roles. Island effects can produce dwarf prey alongside unusual predators, as on Hatzeg. Greenhouse climates serve as enablers for large reptiles since ectotherms depend on environmental heat. Paleo-environmental reconstruction draws on sediment analysis, fossil flora, fossil fauna, and isotope chemistry to characterize ancient ecosystems. Exact population densities and seasonal migrations are rarely preserved in fossils, leaving population-level questions partly speculative. Modern ecosystems cap animal size through energy flow. The blue whale persists because oceanic productivity supports its food demands. Land-based giants like elephants and rhinos hit ceilings imposed by vegetation availability and habitat structure. Giants are ecosystems made visible through bone. 10 vanished habitats lie behind these 10 skeletons, each one a fully functioning world. Why does so much knowledge about these worlds disappear? Knowledge about giants disappears for reasons that are both technical and historical. Taphonomy is the term for the processes controlling how an animal's remains become a fossil. Burial conditions, decay rates, transport by water or wind, scavenging, and chemical alteration all shape what survives. Large bodies do not guarantee complete fossilization. In some ways, they make it harder. A massive carcass attracts more scavengers, decays more slowly in ways that allow disarticulation, and produces bones too heavy for some sediment systems to bury intact. River systems can scatter large bones across distances before final burial. Coastal erosion exposes fossils briefly before waves and weather destroy them. The Ichthyotitan specimen, found on a Somerset beach, illustrates the latter. Marine sediments may preserve vertebrae while losing skulls and limbs, as seen with Perucetus. Mines can reveal fossils, but also damage or fragment them during extraction. Vasuki came from active lignite mining operations, where preservation depended on careful collection by paleontologists working alongside industrial activity. Patagotitan is unusual because the sample is comparatively rich. Multiple individuals in one bone bed provide cross-checks not available for most giants. Ichthyotitan shows how beach fragments can preserve only jaw evidence from animals that were tens of meters long. Perucetus shows how dense bones preserve well while body outline vanishes entirely. Vasuki shows how vertebral columns can outlast skulls in fossil preservation. Megalania shows why fragmentary predators create persistent size disputes. Archelon shows how mounted museum specimens shape public imagination, sometimes more than peer-reviewed studies. Lisowicia shows how a single major discovery can overturn timeline assumptions about an entire group. Paleontologists must separate absence of evidence from evidence of absence. The fact that no fossil of a particular giant has been found does not prove the animal never existed. Conversely, the presence of fragmentary remains does not prove a giant existed at the size sometimes claimed. Knowledge of loss also comes from extinction events themselves, which wipe out entire lineages and end the production of new bones. Erosion removes already deposited fossils. Collection history matters too. Some specimens collected a century ago have been lost, misplaced in museum storage, or damaged by outdated preservation techniques. Naming confusion adds another layer, with single animals sometimes described under multiple genus names before later taxonomic work consolidates them. New discoveries continue to revise the largest ever lists. Old museum drawers and new field sites both contribute. The fossil record is not a complete library, it is a damaged archive, with most volumes missing and many remaining ones torn or partial. A single bone emerging from rock represents the surviving fragment, with most of the animals still hidden in geological time. Given these limits, how do scientists explain why these particular animals reach such extreme sizes? The question of why these giants got so large invites at least three interpretive frameworks, each with its own logic and evidence base. The mainstream theory holds that body size rose where energy, anatomy, and ecology aligned. Patagotitan needed sauropod air sacs, efficient feeding, and abundant plant biomass to sustain its mass. Ichthyotitan and Perucetus benefited from water support and marine productivity, allowing scales impossible on land. Pelagornis used wind energy in place of constant muscular flapping, lowering the energetic cost of staying airborne. The mainstream view treats size as the outcome of multiple permissive conditions occurring together. Remove anyone, and the giant cannot evolve or cannot persist. An archaeological and historical theory shifts the focus to the human side of the equation. What scientists call the largest depends heavily on where humans dig. Mines, coastlines, ranches, quarries, and airport construction sites have produced disproportionate shares of major fossil discoveries. Patagotitan looks strong because many bones were found in one productive site. Ichthyotitan looks uncertain because jaw material dominates the evidence available. Perucetus became controversial because mass estimates were heavily model-dependent, and the model assumptions came under scrutiny. Discovery history shapes what we think of as the largest animal in any group. Regions that have been geologically inaccessible, politically closed, or simply unexplored may contain fossils that would shift current rankings if recovered. A fringe and speculative theory proposes that some vanished ecosystems may have hosted even larger animals than any currently described. The reasoning notes that fragmentary fossils sometimes hint at individuals larger than the type specimens of named species. A few isolated vertebrae or partial limb bones occasionally suggest sizes that exceed the well-documented giants. This view should be treated carefully. Possible, but unsupported without diagnostic fossils that allow formal description. Fragmentary material can hint at larger animals, but cannot prove whole bodies on its own. Across all three theories, the underlying technical concept is the same. Extraordinary size claims require repeatable measurements and peer-reviewed analysis. Named taxa, supported by published descriptions, carry weight that legendary fragments do not. Future finds may change the rankings without invalidating the science behind earlier estimates. Each theory contributes something. Anatomy sets the absolute limits on what is mechanically possible. Ecology supplies the opportunity for those limits to be approached. preservation controls which animals leave evidence for science to find. Final certainty about which animal was the largest ever is not available, and pretending otherwise misrepresents how the science works. Ranked confidence is the appropriate framework. Some giants, like Patagotitan, rest on strong evidence. Others, like the upper estimates for Perucetus, depend on contested assumptions. Nature's innovations work through fundamental laws of support, motion, energy, and survival. Those laws apply to every animal alive today and every animal that ever lived. The remains gathered from Argentina, Somerset, Peru, Gujarat, Romania, Central Asia, Australia, South Carolina, the Dakotas, and Poland sketch 10 different solutions to the problem of being very large. Picture a human silhouette surrounded by bone, wing, jaw, shell, and vertebra, each scaled to its source animal. The proportions tell the story that words can only approximate. 10 extinct body sizes, 10 different worlds, and a single set of physical principles still operating beneath every measurement.